I stood in my daughter's kitchen on the day everything cracked open, and if I'm being honest, I should have seen it coming. The kitchen itself was a showpiece, white marble countertops veined with gold, cabinets that closed with the kind of soft thud that only expensive German engineering can produce, pendant lights hanging like little moons over the island. Hannah was standing across from me, scrolling her phone with one hand while piping buttercream flowers onto a cake with the other. The cake was for my grandson's 5th birthday. 3 tiers. Fondant. Custom design. $300, not counting delivery. I had said something. Not much. Just a gentle observation that maybe the party was getting a little out of hand, and that I couldn't keep covering her financial emergencies the way I had been. I wasn't angry when I said it. I wasn't even disappointed. I was just tired, and I thought maybe, after all these years, I'd earned the right to be honest. She didn't look up at first, just kept scrolling, kept piping those perfect little roses. Then she stopped, set the phone down, looked at me with eyes that had gone flat and hard, and said, "You're useless now, Mom. I don't need your opinions. I just need you to watch the kids and stay out of my way." The words didn't just land. They burrowed. They found every soft place I'd been protecting for years and pressed down hard. This wasn't about my age, though that was part of it. This was about everything I had given, everything I had been, reduced to a single function: babysitter, checkbook, background noise. I thought about all the years I'd spent working double shifts as a nurse so my kids could have what they needed. I thought about the nights I sat alone in a hospice room holding my husband's hand while he forgot my name. I thought about every bill I'd quietly paid, every crisis I'd quietly managed, every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. For a second, I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to pull out the receipts, literal and otherwise, and lay them on that perfect marble island. I wanted her to see me, really see me, and understand what she was dismissing. But I didn't, because something inside me went very still. Not broken, not even hurt, exactly. Just quiet, like a machine finally powering down after running too long. And in that stillness, standing in that beautiful, cold kitchen next to a cake that cost more than I used to make in a week, I realized something I should have understood years ago. The life I'd been living, the one where my only value was in how much I could fix, how much I could give, how invisible I could make myself. That was what had become useless. Not me, the role I'd been playing. And when I finally stopped trying to prove my worth to my own daughter, everything began to change. Before that day in the kitchen, my entire life had been built around one thing: being useful. I didn't realize it at the time, of course. I thought I was just being responsible, just doing what mothers do, what good women do. I spent 30 years as a nurse, working double shifts that left my feet swollen and my back screaming. I missed Thanksgivings, Christmases, birthdays, not because I wanted to, but because someone's grandmother was dying alone in room 304 and her family couldn't get there in time. So I held a hand instead. I did that hundreds of times, held the hands of strangers while their families rushed through traffic or couldn't be bothered to show up at all. Then I'd come home and do it all over again. Cook dinner, clean the house, help Hannah with homework while my husband sat in his recliner, getting quieter each year as his heart slowly gave out. When he finally passed, I remember standing in our empty bedroom thinking I had no idea who I was without someone to take care of. So I filled that emptiness the only way I knew how. I poured myself into Hannah's life instead. She was building her own family by then, and I convinced myself I was helping. She'd call at dawn and I'd be there within the hour to watch the kids. She'd mention her house was a mess and I'd show up with cleaning supplies, scrubbing her floors while she went to brunch with friends. When she was short on rent, I slipped her cash. When the car payment was late, I covered it. When the utilities were about to be shut off, I paid them. I skipped my own dental appointments because the money went to her instead. I wore the same glasses for 5 years because new ones felt selfish when Hannah needed help with daycare costs. I told myself it was love. I told myself that's what mothers do. We sacrifice, we give, we make ourselves small so our children can be big. But the truth, the one I couldn't see until she called me useless, was that I had turned my entire identity into being needed. I had taught Hannah, year after year, crisis after crisis, that I would always be there to fix whatever she broke. That my needs didn't matter. That I didn't have boundaries because love meant having none. So when she finally said I was useless, what she really meant was this: "You are no use to me if you won't keep sacrificing yourself." And that was the part that woke something up inside me that had been asleep for decades. After I left Hannah's house that day, I drove home in silence and sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could bring myself to go inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I expected to cry, maybe, or replay the argument over and over until it lost all meaning. But instead, something else happened. The nurse in me woke up. When a patient came into my ward, I always checked vitals first. Heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, oxygen levels, the baseline data that told you what you were really dealing with before you could treat anything. So that night, sitting at my little dining table with my laptop and a notepad, I decided to check my own vitals. Not my blood pressure, the vital signs of my whole life. I opened my bank accounts and started scrolling. Months of transactions, every one a little decision I'd made without thinking too hard about it. Grocery runs for Hannah's house when she was too busy to shop. Deposits to cover her short months. Online orders I'd paid for just this once that somehow became a standing arrangement. I added it up. The numbers were worse than I wanted to admit, and I'm not talking about pocket change. I'm talking about money I should have been saving for myself, for the future I kept pretending I didn't need to plan for. Then I pulled up my calendar. I flipped back through the months and counted. Days marked with watch kids. Afternoons blocked out for Hannah errands. Mornings I'd gotten up at 5:30 because she needed me before work. And scattered between all of that, in smaller and smaller handwriting, were my own appointments, dental cleanings I'd rescheduled 3 times, a mammogram I'd pushed back twice, a follow-up with my doctor that I'd just stopped booking altogether because something always came up. I opened our text messages next. I scrolled back through weeks, then months. Almost every message from her started the same way. Can you? I need. Do you think you could? I kept scrolling, looking for something else, something that felt like a conversation instead of a request. I found one. Just one. From 4 months ago. "Thanks, Mom." That was it. 2 words. No follow-up question asking how I was. No interest in my life at all. If I had seen this chart in a hospital, if this had been someone else's life laid out in front of me, I would have written the diagnosis immediately. Chronic caregiver burnout, advanced stage, no follow-up care. I didn't see a useless woman when I looked at those numbers. I saw someone who had been used up, and for the first time in my life, I realized there was a condition I could actually treat. A few days after the fight, Hannah called. I saw her name on the screen and felt that old familiar tightness in my chest, the one that always came before I said yes to something I didn't want to do. She was in a rush, talking fast the way she always did when she needed something. Her babysitter had backed out. She had an important work event that evening, something she couldn't miss, and she needed me to take the kids overnight. Just one night. It wouldn't be a big deal. My old reflex kicked in immediately. I could almost feel my hand reaching for my keys, my mind already calculating what I'd need to pack, what time I'd have to leave to get there before she had to go. But I stopped. I took a breath, and I said something I'm not sure I'd ever said to her before. Not like this. "I can't tonight. I have an appointment early in the morning." The silence on the other end was louder than a scream. Then her voice came back, sharp and wounded at the same time, like I'd slapped her. She told me I was being selfish, that I was abandoning my own grandchildren, that she couldn't believe I would choose some appointment over my family. I didn't explain that the appointment was with myself, that I'd blocked out the morning to sit with my own thoughts and figure out what I actually wanted my life to look like. I just held the line and let her be angry. Later that week, she called again. This time it was about money. A small loan. She called it, just to cover a bill that had come in higher than expected. She'd pay me back as soon as her bonus came through. I'd heard that promise before. I told her I couldn't do it anymore. I told her I'd talk to a financial advisor, which was true. I had, and that I couldn't keep giving her money. She didn't take it well. She accused me of turning my back on my family, of being cruel, of not understanding what it was like to raise kids in this economy. While she was still talking, I was sitting in my bank branch with a pen in my hand, canceling the extra debit card I'd given her years ago for emergencies. I closed the joint just-in-case account we'd opened when she first moved out. My hands were shaking when I signed the forms, but I signed them anyway. The next day, I met with a lawyer. I updated my will and my power of attorney, making sure that if I ever got sick or couldn't make decisions for myself, my life couldn't be easily taken over or drained by someone who saw me as a resource instead of a person. Hannah called me twice during that appointment. I let it go to voicemail both times. By the time she finally hung up on me after our last argument about the money, I hurt. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I had actually taken care of my most neglected patient, myself. Once the emergency calls slowed down and the money stopped leaking out of my accounts every month, my days suddenly felt different. Quiet. At first, I have to admit that silence scared me more than the chaos ever had. I'd built my entire life around being someone's solution, someone's rescue plan. Without that role, I didn't know what I was supposed to do with myself. I'd wake up in the morning and feel almost guilty that no one needed me urgently, that my phone wasn't ringing at dawn with another crisis. But then I decided to treat that empty space like a prescription, not a punishment. I joined a walking group at the community center, just to move my legs and hear other people's stories instead of drowning in my own. The women that were around my age, some older, some younger, all of them carrying their own quiet histories. One of them mentioned that a free clinic a few miles away needed extra hands. They were understaffed and overwhelmed, trying to save families who couldn't afford regular doctors. I signed up for one afternoon a week. At first, I just checked blood pressure and took temperatures. I talked to nervous young parents who didn't know if their baby's fever was serious. I answered simple health questions, the kind I used to answer in my sleep after 3 decades of nursing. It felt good to use what I knew without feeling drained afterward. Before long, the clinic director pulled me aside and asked if I'd be willing to run a small workshop. She called it Healthy Starts. It was for single mothers who didn't know how to cook on a budget, how to read medicine labels, how to stretch their resources without sacrificing their kids' health. Standing in front of that little group the first time, watching them lean forward and take notes while I demonstrated how to make a basic nutritious meal for under $10, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. It was usefulness, yes, but the steady, grounded kind. The kind that didn't hollow me out. The kind where people listened because they wanted to learn, not because they expected me to solve everything for them. I quietly took the money I used to pour into Hannah's lifestyle, the rent supplements, the emergency loans, the endless little purchases that added up to thousands, and I set up a tiny fund at the clinic. Bus passes for patients who couldn't afford transportation. Prescriptions that insurance wouldn't cover. Exam fees for families who were one paycheck away from disaster. The rules were clear. The boundaries were firm. When someone asked for help outside those guidelines, I said no, and they thanked me anyway for what the fund could do. I went home after one of those sessions and cried. Not from exhaustion this time. Not from feeling used up or invisible. I cried because I finally felt needed in the right way. I need to be honest about what happened on Hannah's side when I stopped being her safety net. She had to juggle things she'd never had to manage alone before. Daycare waiting lists. Last-minute sitters who charged double what I used to accept without complaint. Bills that actually had to be paid on time because there was no one quietly covering them from the background anymore. I heard through my son that a big work presentation almost fell apart when her childcare arrangement collapsed at the last minute and she had no backup plan. The birthday party she'd been planning, the one that would have been even more extravagant than the cake that started all of this, had to be scaled way down because the credit card she used to lean on no longer existed. I heard about these things in fragments. Tight, clipped messages she'd send late at night. Calls I sometimes didn't answer because I was at the clinic or simply because I needed space. Whispers from relatives who thought I should know, who maybe thought I'd cave if I heard how. Hard things were for her. Part of me ached when I heard those stories, especially when I thought about my grandchildren caught in the middle of it all. But another part of me, the part that had finally woken up, knew that I had warned her for years. I had told her gently, then clearly, then desperately that this pattern couldn't continue. and I knew that if I kept rescuing her, she would never learn to stand on her own. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening in my own life. The little program at the clinic started to grow. Word spread through the community, and more mothers started showing up to the workshops. We added a second session, then a third. The clinic director applied for a small grant, and we got it. One afternoon, a local reporter showed up with a camera, took photos of me teaching a group how to read nutrition labels, and wrote a short piece for the community paper. The headline called me the retired nurse who became a lifeline for struggling families. I laughed when I read it, but my hands trembled. Not from nerves, from pride, from the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being seen for what I was actually doing, not just what I was expected to give. A few weeks later, the clinic held a small evening event to thank the donors and volunteers who'd made the program possible. It was nothing fancy, folding chairs in the community room, store-bought cookies, a little speech from the director. But when she called my name and asked me to stand, people clapped. Real applause, not polite noise. I stood there in my good sweater, the one I'd finally bought for myself, and felt my throat tighten. Then I looked up toward the back of the room, and I froze. Standing near the door, in a wrinkled blouse and smeared eyeliner, was Hannah. She was staring at me like she'd just walked into the wrong building and found a stranger where her mother used to be. After the event ended, I stepped outside for air. The evening had cooled down, and I stood in the parking lot under a streetlight, letting my heartbeat settle. I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Hannah. She followed me out, her arms crossed tight against her chest, her voice tight and sharp at the same time. Her first question wasn't, "Are you happy?" or "I'm proud of you, Mom." It was, "How can you give money to strangers when your own family is struggling?" Those words still stung. I'm not going to pretend they didn't. But this time, I didn't fold. I turned to face her and I told her the truth. I said I had already spent years trying to buy my place in her life, pouring money and time and pieces of myself into every crisis she brought to my door. And all it had taught her was to see me as a resource, not a person, not a mother, just someone who was supposed to show up and fix things and then disappear until the next emergency. I explained that the small fund I'd created at the clinic wasn't about choosing strangers over her. It was about choosing a legacy that matched my values. It was about using what I had learned over 30 years of the nice to keep helping people. Yes, but people who actually wanted to stand on their own feet. People who said thank you and meant it. People who didn't call me useless the moment I stopped being useful to them. I told her I would always love her. That would never change. But I would no longer finance a life that treated me like I was worthless unless I was paying for something. If she wanted a relationship with me now, it would have to be built on respect and honesty, not guilt and obligation. It would have to be real. She didn't say anything. She just stood there for a long time, her face unreadable in the dim light. Then she turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, and I felt sad, but I also felt something else. Relief. Clarity, peace. So let me ask you something. When my daughter called me useless, she accidentally forced me to measure the true worth of my life. And what I found was that I had been pouring myself into someone who would never see me the way those mothers at the clinic did. What are you pouring yourself into right now? And does it truly deserve that much of you?